Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. Do want to send out a quick apology for this being a couple hours late. It's going to be that way this week because I am no longer on the East Coast. I'm out in Las Vegas. So for my sanity, we're not recording these at 8 a.m. Eastern time like we typically do because I tried the whole record at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. thing yesterday for the Steelers podcast. And let's just say, Horwat, wasn't my brightest moment. Let's just say that.
It is what it is. Sometimes you just need to get a little break from your everyday life anyway, and you're taking it out in the West Coast, and honestly, good for you. It is snowing like a mother here.
Yeah, I got out just in time because even in Virginia, where it never snows, at least not in bulk quantities, they got like 9 to 10 inches. So I'm glad that I am no longer there, at least for the week. But hopefully everybody stays safe this week, and hopefully the Pittsburgh Penguins can turn the momentum that they've built through the last 3 games into some victories here, because that's where we're going to lead off today's show. Did the Penguins actually gain momentum despite going 0-3 on their most recent road trip to start 2025? And then we'll discuss one Penguin star who is in the middle of his best stretch since joining the team. And we'll close things out discussing 2 interesting listener-submitted mock trades. Let's get started today on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. We mentioned we're going to kick things off with the Penguins actually gaining momentum. And I know people will beg to differ simply because, well, they're on a 3-game losing streak. So in what way, shape, or form could they have momentum building despite losing in 3 straight? Well, those last 2 games, in my eyes, they played very good hockey against tough teams. I understand Carolina is as beatable as they have been in the last decade, which is not saying much because they have not been beatable, especially for the Penguins, in a while. But I thought that was their best performance in Carolina in recent memory. And then, of course, playing Florida tough, taking it down to the shootout, which we both know is not real hockey. So I don't really belabor the fact that they lost in a shootout because I don't like the shootout to begin with. But playing Florida tough both times, playing a solid game against the Carolina Hurricanes, I thought it was a pretty good road trip. What did you make of their performance on the road in the last week?
It certainly doesn't feel like they're on a 3-game losing streak. It helps that they've gotten, a couple pity points in a row, and for a couple hours there, pretty much a whole 24 hours, they were in a playoff position. The Penguins were holding down that second wildcard spot until the red-hot Montreal Canadiens decided to also pick up a couple of wins against tough teams. It's going to be a tight race if the Penguins want to stay in this playoff hunt, but yeah, it doesn't feel like they're on a 3-game losing streak. Those pity points help. There's not much else to it. Staying in games against those tough teams is a good start. They do need to get over the edge. Mike Sullivan wasn't happy after the Carolina game, but the frustrations will boil over whenever it's been years of the same thing against the same team at all times. Mm-hmm. Penguins get up early, and then can't hold on to it, especially when it goes to overtime. And the way Mike Sullivan put it, they just got out-competed. So, yeah, even in these losses, there are obviously the fact they're not getting the second point out of it. They are letting other teams outperform them. I can see the glass going both ways, the glass half full and half empty of, you're right, it feels like they're getting more momentum out of taking good teams into overtime. But also, you got to collect the wins. You just have to.
Yeah, now here's the thing about the Carolina game. First period, best I've seen them play, and the best I've seen them kind of take on the Carolina attack and the Carolina defense in a long, long time. That's home, away. We all know that they've struggled down to PNC Arena. But basically, no matter what, that was the best I've seen them play against the Carolina Hurricanes. Second period, it all fell apart. That's probably the one part of this 3-game road trip where I looked at it and I said, man, that's the downfall right there. Because if they would have had even a slightly better second period, they probably walk away with 2 points in regulation against the Carolina Hurricanes. I mean, you were up 2-0, you go down 3-2 because of a couple of bad turnovers, one by Matt Grzelcyk to start the period, and I believe he had another one in that period as well. But I understand that at the end of the day, you need wins. You do. But considering where this team has been, and I get that caveat has to be wiped away soon with the way that they've been playing for more than a month now, but I liked the way that they were able to play against Florida, first and foremost, who's a tough matchup for anybody, and Carolina, a team that every time they go in to play them, you usually just look at this and say, well, I don't know if the Penguins have any idea how to perform against this team. They actually looked like they had a clue, and I understand that's a low bar to clear, but that's what it looked like on Sunday afternoon in Raleigh, and that gave me some hope coming into a very, very big homestand. Now, we talked about it. Momentum is only as good as you make it whenever you turn it into wins, right? You can have all the momentum in the world. If you're losing these games, if you're only picking up the pity point, it's not going to do you any favors in the standings, especially when the mushy middle looks the way it does right now. I mean, tied with the Montreal Canadiens, 1 point above the Columbus Blue Jackets. I believe there's another team right there as well. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but the Ottawa Senators
are
coming up on the schedule as well. So you need to start collecting 2 points. But I think that when you look at that road trip, if they came away with 2 of a possible 6, I think they did that in the best way possible. Again, when I'm saying that, you have to understand that you obviously want more of them that, but I still think that kind of the ingredients were there. They just need to put them together when they come home here for this homestand.
Absolutely. The way you said that they need to start collecting 2 points is perfect. You could even add the Lightning, lump the Lightning into this conversation here. Yeah. Between the Tampa Bay Lightning, who hold the first wild card spot, and the Buffalo Sabres, who are in last in the conference, there's 7 points. That sounds big. That kind of sounds like a wide margin, but consider that the Penguins are at 41 points, just a point back of those Lightning, tied with the Canadiens. 7 overtime losses, by the way. You thought the Islanders were overtime merchants.
Yeah.
You're tied with them now in OTLs. But then that 1 point behind them is the Senators and Blue Jackets. 1 point behind them is the Flyers. Another point back is the Red Wings. The Rangers are floundering, but they're still there and still the Rangers. And they're tied with the Islanders, and the Sabres are 2 points behind them. Every team in the East is still within reach. We've been discussing the East being a close race. Mm-hmm. We're at the middle point of the season. No longer is it's those early stages of the year discussions. Now the East looks like it could be jump ball for all 16 teams. It's going to be a close race. It's going to be tight. And for the Penguins to come out on the upper end of things, they're going to need those 2 point wins. You're going to need to steal those 4 point swings on teams, especially when it comes to your interdivision rivals. It's the top 3 teams in the division are a bit separated from everyone else in the Metro, but you still got to take those points, especially for yourself in getting into a playoff spot if you want to. The Canadiens went from the bottom team into a playoff spot. It's anyone's game now.
Yeah, any one bad week or one really good week for each team is going to change their positioning significantly here over the next month. That's just the way that the Eastern Conference is shaped up. And I think because of that, you look at this homestand that starts tonight against the Columbus Blue Jackets and say it's probably, again, it might be premature to say this, but it's probably a make or break homestand considering what's following this homestand, right? You have 5 games, 2 of them against wildcard opponents, tonight against Columbus, and then on Saturday against Ottawa. You mentioned you could lump in Tampa Bay. I understand that they have so many games in hand that it's not really a 1 point disadvantage for the Penguins, but a 4 point swing certainly makes that look a lot better if you're able to take down the Tampa Bay Lightning on Sunday afternoon. And then you have Edmonton on Thursday, which historically, again, we've talked ad nauseum every time these guys go up against the Oilers. The Penguins have not had an answer for the Edmonton Oilers for 4 years almost. So this is a huge homestand that they need to collect those 2 points. And they have momentum coming into it despite being on a 3-game losing streak. I think they need to start building even more. And that needs to start tonight because after that 7-game road trip leading up to practically the Four Nations face-off, there's a couple home games following it, but 2.5 weeks, the end of January, all on the road. That's going to be tough for the Penguins. I understand they're playing opponents that aren't as difficult as on this 5-game homestand. I mean, you're playing an Anaheim team that's still an Anaheim team that you know about. You're playing San Jose, who's still at the bottom of the standings. But you need to make hay on this homestand right now, because if you don't, then you're going to put yourself on your back foot, probably at the bottom of that mushy middle in the Eastern Conference, going into your season-long 7-game road trip that is not going to be easy for this team.
Yeah, no kidding. And if it does help anything, with this first game tonight against the Blue Jackets, Mark Shake put out a great tweet. He put it out last season, actually. He put it out March 5th, 2024. The last time the Blue Jackets have won in Pittsburgh, it was still the Barack Obama presidency. Adele's Hello was still at the top of the music charts. The Hunger Games Part 2 wasn't even in theaters yet. So if the Penguins have anything to fall back on, it is they've got a heck of a winning streak against the Columbus Blue Jackets in Pittsburgh. But, man, of the Blue Jackets, a different animal this year. It's they're playing with some real emotion this year, and I mean, they're doing great things for what it's worth, and they're, like we said, a point out of a playoff spot. Who knows how tonight goes? They might have that extra advantage. They might have that extra boost that, hey, a win against a team they haven't beaten in Pittsburgh in however long puts them into a playoff spot. There's some extra mojo for the Blue Jackets coming in. So somehow this is actually a very big game for the Penguins to need to take care of business.
Yeah. Now they might have a new face, not a completely new face, but a face that they haven't seen in a while, jumping into the lineup. Shout out to Penn's Inside Scoop, who had the line rushes for morning skate today. Something we've talked about a couple of times is Jesse Puljujärvi, who hasn't had opportunities. Last week he was thrown on waivers, cleared waivers, and then didn't get sent down, I think, because of how soon you were going to see Kris Letang and Owen Pickering come back into the lineup. They just didn't have those answers when they put them on waivers. They did have those answers a little bit later in the week, so they didn't have to send Puljujärvi down in favor of another defenseman. And now here we are today. The injury to Phil Tomasino opened up the door for Anthony Beauvillier to get back in the lineup after he took a healthy scratch. And then Beauvillier doesn't look all that great against Carolina. In comes Jesse Puljujärvi. We've said on multiple occasions we want to see him get a shot. What does he have to do tonight for you to be happy with his performance? And what does he have to do, do you think, to stay in the lineup where right now it seems like that position, third line right wing, is kind of in flux with the 13th forward and whoever actually gets to play?
Yeah, it's up in the air for anyone to take. Jesse Puljujärvi be right in that conversation. I need to find it. Josh Yohe pretty much said why Puljujärvi hasn't been a regular in the lineup. And it essentially boiled down to he just makes certain mistakes that the coaching staff doesn't like. So if he can minimize those mistakes, regardless of if he scores a point or not, as long as he can minimize or even completely eliminate any of the mistakes that drive the coaching staff nuts, and by all means, then he'll be earning his role again in the lineup. And yeah, it's the whole thing that Josh Yohe wrote was he makes mental mistakes that drives the coaching staff bonkers.
Yeah,
that's about it. That's the whole thing. He lines those up, fixes those. Suddenly you have once again a useful NHL player. He's already pretty much paced what he did last year in the same amount of games. Now it's a matter of getting back into the lineup regularly, minimizing those mistakes, and he should be good to go.
Yeah, the offensive side of the ice has never been a question with Jesse Puljujärvi, at least not when he's been with the Penguins. But the defensive side, especially early in the season, whenever the Penguins had nothing going for them on the defensive side of the ice, now that they've started to kind of figure some things out, Matt Nieto, Nola Chari, and Blake Lizotte have been very good at preventing chances. Once you start to build that type of kind of atmosphere in the bottom six, it pushes out a guy that makes mistakes that Puljujärvi does typically make. Now, again, that's what I want to see. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Just kind of limit those, hey, you're going to have to sit for a half a period type of mistakes, because I think Puljujärvi has had a bunch of those. We've seen that in the past with young players that they've made that mistake and all of a sudden they lose their ice time. Valtteri Puustinen, who is not a bad defensive hockey player, but has made some of those errors, it's cost him ice time. So just go out there, take your shifts, and take what's in front of you. Don't try to force it. And that's what I think a lot of players do whenever they get this opportunity after sitting for so long, especially if they're sitting in the press box and not even playing in the AHL, is they try to force the issue. They try to make a statement. That way they can kind of stay at the NHL level, but the best way to stay in the lineup there is just to play your game and take what's given to you and make the best out of it, and not to push the issue and try to force something and potentially force a turnover, which is exactly what Josh Yohe is referencing. So we'll see if he does indeed get in the lineup. Of course, that is what it looks like from Morning Skate. Shout out again to Penn's Inside Scoop, who put that out on their X account, on her X account, I should say. It's Michelle. But we'll have to wait and see what he's able to do. Speaking of players that don't always play the best defensive hockey, but a player that is certainly finding his rhythm on the offensive side of the ice, Erik Karlsson. It's been rocky, to say the least, since he joined the Pittsburgh Penguins. He had a tough season last year where there were glimpses of that offensive brilliance that everybody obviously raves about, that's going to get him into the hallowed halls of the Hockey Hall of Fame one day, but a lot of it was few and far between. And it was not enough to make up for the defensive woes that Karlsson displayed all of last season and early in this season as well. Well, we're kind of starting to see why Dubas wanted Erik Karlsson now. If you look at the last 10 games, he has 9 points, 2 of those being goals, leads the team in scoring chances by a large margin. And the Penguins are outscoring opponents 13-8 at even strength when he's on the ice. Now, as always, there is a trade-off with Erik Karlsson. And I understand that some people don't like that. No matter how good the trade-off is in the offensive side of the ice, there is a trade-off. I told you that he's leading the Penguins in scoring chances for. He's also leading the Penguins in scoring chances against when on the ice at 5-on-5. Also, by a very wide margin, he has allowed, when on the ice, 113 scoring chances in the last 10 games, which is 26 more than the second highest player on the Penguins. So you got a lot of good, you got a lot of bad. But the question that I have for you, Horwat, is this the best version of Erik Karlsson that we are going to see? And if so, is it enough to justify the trade that has been criticized for over a calendar year?
I feel like we had this exact conversation last season, by the way.
We did. Just late last year.
Yeah, just the idea of, is Erik Karlsson finally coming around to playing his game with the new team? How many? What was that number you said there? How many scoring chances against?
113 in the last 10 games. And it's not just him. It's when he's on the ice at 5-on-5. The Penguins have given up 113. But again, you can attribute it to him whenever it's 26 more than second place.
That's just hilarious because the Penguins have given up in total 152 goals. I get this.
In the last 10 games.
Right. But
yeah.
I'm kind of trying to put the perspective on of that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit. We're having the same conversation again of, hey, he's finally coming around to playing the way he should whenever the Penguins got him for the price they paid for it. I've been saying from the beginning it was a good deal to make, regardless of how Karlsson, quote unquote, performs. The Penguins shed a ton of cap in some way, shape, or form, aside from getting a $10 million player. They were able to essentially lighten the load and free up spaces for other players because they sent out a bunch of names. I'll bring in just one. In total, I mean, I'd say it was still worth it. And as long as he can hit these offensive numbers and he can be this great offensive mind, there's no way that this is a negative move for the Penguins still. You say what you want defensively, but that's what Marcus Pettersson was able to make up for all of last year. I get this year's a bit different, but at the same time, no matter what's going on and who's playing essentially what position or style of play, if the Penguins are winning, who really cares? They all say it's winning will pretty much mend every fence. Winning will make you forget every contract number you have on the books. I mean, if the Penguins continue to win, I don't think too many people will care about certain defensive mistakes or lapses from Erik Karlsson. I mean, those numbers are staggering, the scoring chances against, but it's it should weigh itself out. You know, the Penguins knew what they were getting. Kyle Dubas knew what he was getting in Erik Karlsson. He knew he wanted him in Toronto, and he managed to get him in Pittsburgh. So now it's, you know what you have. He's going to put up numbers offensively. You got to make sure there's someone back defensively to take care of him. And heck, goaltending stepping up a bit too could help. But as long as the Penguins are winning, I don't think too many people care overall.
Yeah, All in all, I'm going to say it's enough. If he plays the way that he's been playing, I understand. Again, there is that trade-off, and you have to eat it. And it's not fun, but at the same time, whenever you see him making plays like he did on Sunday, whenever he danced around Jordan Martinook and then set up Michael Bunting for that goal, which is a play that very few players in this league can make, whenever he took that slap shot to tie the game in the third period, that's the other side of this. That is the side that the Penguins didn't see enough of last year. If you look at Erik Karlsson over the last 10 games, the frequency of his what the F plays are increasing. Now, there is how the F did he do that, which is what we saw on Saturday. Like, how did he pull this off? And there's why the F did he do that, which is the defensive lapses, the turnovers, the times where you're saying, man, this guy should not be labeled as a defenseman in any way, shape, or form. But the frequency of both of those is rising. I think whenever you have that, especially at 5-on-5, that's the trade-off the Penguins bargained for whenever they brought him in. That's what the Penguins want out of Erik Karlsson. They don't want him to play conservatively so he doesn't give up the big defensive laps, because if he's doing that, he's a non-factor in the offensive zone, and then it's pointless. Then it's worthless. So they want him to take these chances. They want him to play at this high pace, this high-risk level, and I think it's starting to pay off a little bit more for him over the last 10 games. If he can maintain it in the second half, the Penguins will be better off, especially with him producing crazy offense at 5-on-5 like he has been. And then you have Letang and Grzelcyk, who have been stepping up on the power play, which is why it's a top 5 unit right now in the NHL. If the Penguins keep that kind of structure and can start to build on the back end with hopefully Pettersson kind of breaking out of this kind of mediocre type of season that he's had, with Owen Pickering continuing to take steps forward, hopefully with P.O. Joseph getting more and more comfortable in his second stint with the team, I think you're looking at the blue line as still a work in progress, still not one of the better units in the NHL, but considering where they were at the beginning, I think you look at that unit as one that has taken so many steps forward that it actually gives you a shot at having a above average defensive unit when all things are considered.
Yeah, and that should be kind of the goal, especially since going into this year, it was a bunch of question marks. It was, well, you're going to have Pettersson probably step up defensively. I haven't seen too much of that this year. You'll see Letang and Karlsson put up offensive numbers. Took a while for Karlsson. Letang is sort of, working his way through the motions. Everyone knew Grzelcyk was going to be question marks all over the place going into the season. And then really you didn't know who was going to be the regular faces as the third pairing. You just kind of had to hope whoever was in there was steady enough. And really, again, more question marks. So the fact that things are starting to come together a bit more, bare minimum, that's a net positive from where the Penguins were heading into the season and the start of the year, as long as things keep progressing in the right direction. And for what it's worth, I mean, you saw some life without Marcus Pettersson, and that's going to be a huge factor going forward. If he remains mediocre and you believe there are better options within your team, I mean, the trade value goes down, but you're trading him at some point anyway. Essentially, there's no way he's going to make it past the deadline. It might be a small return, but at the same time, if he's only playing so, it ain't that much of a issue. I don't know how to put it. I don't want to say that getting a small return for Pettersson is what the Penguins have to deal with, but I mean, if they believe there's someone better, they'll take a smaller return than they would have liked. Not by much, though.
Yeah, I still think there's going to be, even with him because it's not like he's playing bad. Right. He's just not playing up to his standard. Even with that, I think there's going to be a lot of interest around him at the deadline, simply because another team's going to look at that and say, all right, he's slumping a little bit. Maybe this change of scenery, maybe bringing him here, maybe putting him with a different partner kind of reinvigorates him a little bit. I mean, we've heard the Vancouver rumors. We've heard the Edmonton rumors. There's teams that are going to be interested. And if there ends up being a bidding war, say there's not another defenseman that is kind of on the market like that his value is going to go up inherently no matter what he does on the ice. So it's going to be, I'm intrigued to see where this blue line finishes out this season. Again, we still have half a year to go, but does Jack St. Ivany kind of burst out of his sophomore slump and reestablish himself as an option in that bottom pairing? Does P.O. Joseph continue to take steps forward and kind of be the guy that the Penguins wanted him to be his first go around in Pittsburgh? Does Owen Pickering continue to build week after week, day after day, and take all that information in that same article you mentioned about Josh Yohe? He said that's what the Pens love about Owen Pickering is he can take kind of criticism. He can take constructive criticism. He can take instruction, and you see it translate so quickly because he absorbs it well, and he kind of adjusts so quickly for a 20-year-old that they love that about him. So can he continue to do that? And where does that leave him in 41 games? Like, what kind of defenseman is he in 41 games? So I think this is going to be probably, out of everything on the Penguins roster right now, this is going to be the one group that I'm looking at and saying it could be so much better than it is now in 41 games just by minimal growth to each individual player. And I think that we're starting to see that out of certain guys, Erik Karlsson especially. Let's finish off this episode with a listener question, because a listener last week, Ryan, dropped in a couple of mock trades. And I love mock trades. Sometimes don't want to address them because sometimes it's like, all right, which BlackBerry did you get out on NHL 13 to make this move? Because it doesn't sound like anything that's going to happen in the actual NHL. But Ryan says, what do you guys think of these trades? Let's start with this one. Says Ryan Graves, Drew O'Connor, and a 5th-round pick to the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for Vladimir Tarasenko. What do you think of that mock trade, Horwat?
I mean, it feels like the Penguins have been trying to trade for Tarasenko for ages.
Yeah.
And by
they almost signed him, apparently.
Yeah, I was say, and whenever I say Penguins trying to trade for him, I do mostly mean the fan base on Twitter. But, I mean, I'm going to boil it down to it makes sense because Evgeni Malkin's not never. It's been a long time since he had another Russian in the lineup with him for like a long period of time. Not just
Sergei Plotnikov.
There's been touches that got Dmitry Kulikov a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Again, short-lived. Sergei Plotnikov, short-lived. It's been since Gonchar, and we've discussed this before. It's been since Sergei Gonchar that he's really had a legitimate lineup regular from his native country. He's done. I mean, there's something to be said about guys that play well together being from the same homeland. Malkin's never really had that experience. He's never really had that chance, and he's done obviously perfectly fine. He's a top 100 player of all time. Hint, hint, wink, wink. But it'd be interesting to see what kind of oomph he can bring to the end of his career with someone who speaks the same language. As for this deal, I think because of that helps it out a lot to see what you can do with Evgeni Malkin after you get a player like that. Does the trade make sense overall? Yeah, I think so. As long as Detroit's willing to take that on, that's kind of the issue.
Yeah, that's for me on the Penguin side of things. It would be worth it to offload the Graves contract, which is exactly why I don't think the Detroit Red Wings would be interested in it. I mean, Vlad Tarasenko has 1 year remaining after this one at 4.75. Graves has 3 years at 4.5. So you'd be essentially kind of evening it out, but taking 2 years off the top. Again, Ryan Graves is a healthy scratch worth $4.5 million right now. I don't think anybody is taking that on, let alone the Detroit Red Wings. Now, Tarasenko, he's not like the Penguins could use another top 6 winger. They could use somebody specifically to play next to Evgeni Malkin because I don't think they're going to break up that top line, and I don't think Michael Bunting's going anywhere. But they need somebody to play on the right side of Evgeni Malkin. Would Vladimir Tarasenko, name-wise, look great there? Yes. Talent-wise, at this stage of his career, he's not really a top 6 guy anymore. He still has the shot. He still has some of the ability, but this year he has 1 more point than Drew O'Connor. Like, that's where he stands on the Detroit Red Wings. Last year, he won a Stanley Cup as a bottom 6 player, a veteran depth piece for the Florida Panthers. Now, again, that's partly because the Florida Panthers are one of the deepest teams forward-wise in the NHL, so it would make sense that he was a depth piece there. So I don't think that he is exactly what the Penguins are looking for right now, and I don't think the Detroit Red Wings would take on Ryan Graves. I don't know if anybody would take on Ryan Graves, a guy that is right now eating healthy scratches more than he's playing, and he has 3 more years at 4.5 after this one.
Yeah, another thing about Detroit is they have such a weird situation on the blue line. I know they're alleviating it a bit. Olimata's in Utah now, but they're still sort of shuffling guys all over the place. Also, the Vladimir Tarasenko, since he left St. Louis, I didn't realize has just bounced around the NHL.
Oh, yeah.
He's yet to spend a full year with a team since leaving St. Louis. I mean, there was obviously the Rangers run at the back end of 23, then Ottawa for over half of a season, and then Florida. He still put up 14 points in 19 games during the regular season with Florida. 55 in total last season between Ottawa and Florida. I mean, the production has dropped off for him, especially quite quickly. But I mean, could that also just be Detroit falling well short of expectations?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the Yzer plan is. Do you?
No one does.
Or what, 6, 7 of the Yzer plan? I don't know. I have no idea what it was. So I will say this, Ryan. If you take Graves out of this, I think it is more likely to happen. If you have it as Drew O'Connor and a 5th for Vladimir Tarasenko, which does it help? I don't know, right? Because what you're giving up in Drew O'Connor is a very good penalty killer, as a young player that is probably going to be traded before the deadline, but that and a 5th for essentially a lottery ticket. Is Vladimir Tarasenko going to be what he was early? Like, is playing next to Malkin going to bring out that sharpshooter, heavy influx of goals from Vladimir Tarasenko? If it does, great. But at the same time, it's a risk because you're getting rid of a guy that plays defense on the forward side of things, which is rare for the Penguins at this current moment. So it's an interesting trade. I think if you take Graves out, it is a much more realistic trade on both ends for the Penguins and the Red Wings. He also sent a second one here that included Graves. Ryan Graves, this time I think he would need to be included if this was ever going to happen. Ryan Graves, Kevin Hayes, and Drew O'Connor, along with a 4th-round pick and a 7th-round pick to Anaheim in exchange for Trevor Zegras and Jacob Trouba at 50% retention, which would take him down to $4 million for the next 2 years. Horwat, do you like this massive trade between the Penguins and the Ducks? This mock trade, I should make sure to say that, between the Penguins and the Ducks.
This is a fascinating one. I don't know where I land on it, to be so honest, just because, mostly because I think Trouba is just so sick of being put in trade rumors to be in this situation. I mean, he signed a deal with a no trade clause for a reason. And I think ever since the summer, he's just been so sick of it. He's finally happy to be just done with it. I doubt he agrees to another trade anywhere this season, especially after he already moved once. Even if it's a team that's not on his list, I bet he'd at least be sour about that sort of thing. But the Zegras part of it is where things get interesting because, again, you're right. The Penguins could use that top 6 scorer. But also, really, what is Trevor Zegras aside from banged up right now? That's the thing. No one really knows what he is. He had those 2 really good seasons early in his career, got the cover of the video game, looked like one of the hottest stars in the NHL, looked like the future of Anaheim, and then just, I mean, injuries banged him up again, but the numbers deteriorated even when he was healthy. He does look like he wants out so genuinely. I don't know if it's a tough one just because with this specific trade, I don't think Trouba agrees to it. So there goes the whole thing. If Trouba was to agree to it, yeah, by all means, just because watching Trouba play against the Rangers after what they did to him, amazing theater. But otherwise, I don't see it happening, but I would love to see it though. One of those players you hate to play against would love on your team.
Yeah, it's very true. The one thing I will say is even if Trouba agrees to this, even if all parties involved are saying, yeah, we'll do this, I don't think it works for either team. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the right side for the Penguins. You have Letang, you have Karlsson, and you have a question mark. But are you really going to fill that question mark with $4 million and Jacob Trouba at 30 years old? I mean, I think you're already heavily invested on the right side for veterans, and I don't think that you'd add another one. And then I don't think it does enough for the Anaheim Ducks. I mean, I understand that Zegras, and we'll get to Zegras more in a second, but Zegras is a guy that they're not going to get, a full return for. Not a full return that you would expect for a 23-year-old that has so much potential. But the best piece they're going to get back is OC, who's a UFA. I mean, yeah, a 4th and a 7th, that's some nice qualifiers, but you're eating Kevin Hayes, who has been decent when playing, good offensive instincts, slow on the foot speed. I'm not sure how that matches with the Anaheim Ducks' current kind of pace of play. And Ryan Graves, again, a player who is right now a healthy scratch at $4.5 million. So I just don't think it does enough for the Ducks. I don't think Pat Verbeek would look at that and say, yeah, that helps my team in the long run. And I don't think the Penguins really have the space for Trouba. Now, Trevor Zegras, we'll finish on this. That is a discussion, all in all, worth having in my eyes. Sure. Now, you said it. I agree with it. He's rehabbing a torn meniscus right now. He's 4 weeks into a expected 6-week recovery time. So he's coming back here in the next couple of weeks, probably before the Four Nations face-off, if not directly after the Four Nations face-off. 1 year left on that deal at 5.75. That is exactly the type of move I think the Penguins should be making. I mean, you mentioned it. His play has fallen off under Verbeek and Cronin. He has 10 points in 24 games played this year before suffering the torn meniscus, but I keep looking back at the 2 20-plus goal, 60-plus point seasons in his first full year and his second full year and saying he did that in Anaheim. Not Anaheim with Leo Karlsson, not Anaheim with Mason McTavish. He did that with some of the worst offensively built teams of this century in the Anaheim Ducks. And he's 23 years old. I look at that and I say, if you're able to, that is the move that the Penguins should be making. We're talking about they need another top 6 guy. We're talking about them looking for guys like a Nils Höglander, guys like a Nicholas Robertson, young guys, young players with high offensive upside that have fallen out of favor. I think Trevor Zegras is the epitome of what the Penguins should be looking for right now. I understand the last 2 years, not great. He's only played in 55 games. The injuries do become a concern at some point. But I think the potential is there. And like I said earlier, I don't think the Anaheim Ducks are going to get a full return on Trevor Zegras because everybody in the league knows that, hey, you can hold on to this guy, but we know at the end of the day, he is not part of your future plans. So that has to take kind of a large chunk of a potential return down a peg. So I think that this is something that the Penguins should 100% be interested in if there are discussions to be had.
If that's kind of the plan the Ducks want to take. The Ducks made, by signing Frank Vatrano, they made things really interesting because that's a guy that absolutely could have been placed onto a Stanley Cup caliber team and shoved into the playoffs. But he and the team decided to keep him around for another 3 years. Contract details are awesome, by the way. But there's something interesting going on with that, and the Ducks think that they're going to be buyers soon. They're going to try and build something very, very soon. Does that mean Zegras is a part of it? Doubtful, but if depending on how everyone feels, about the situation, especially after he returns from his injury, if he's starting to play really well and facially looks a lot better and a little bit more into it, maybe he becomes a key piece of the end of the rebuild in Anaheim. It's tough to say at the moment because, again, he's injured. They don't really know where everything stands and if it's up to the Ducks, essentially. But signing Frank Vatrano kind of signaled that the Ducks are going to be trying to go for it soon. They like what they have with Dostal between the pipes because John Gibson is absolutely getting traded this year, I think, finally.
That's the thing that we've been talking about for years. I will believe that when I see it because he has been on the trade. He's been on the trade block since we were like sophomores in college.
Yeah, but no kidding. But they have an interesting team. They have an interesting lineup. And I mean, for what it's worth, Trouba's going to be a big part of the defense, I think, for a little bit, at least this year and next year. Or is this the final year of his? Yeah, at least this year, next year. God. Oh, yeah, I forgot he's playing with Brian Dumoulin. But it's an interesting team. I just don't know, and it's tough to say where they all stand with Trevor Zegras. But he fits exactly the role the Penguins are looking for in trades, and that is those castaway options of, well, they were supposed to be this, and now they're not. But they might still have it because they're still young enough to grow back into it in a new situation. Maybe not this specific trade or mock trade that was given to us, but maybe something could be had with Zegras as the piece to build around.
Yeah, I like it, man. Like I've seen that. Everything I've read is that he was trying to kind of focus in on that 200-foot game earlier this season, which affected his offensive numbers. But I'm going to keep a close eye on him when he returns, because if the Penguins are looking for those options, like I mentioned, this is the epitome of what they should be looking for. If he can kind of bring a little bit more effort in the defensive zone, it doesn't even need to be that effective, just effort. I think Sullivan will be happy to give him opportunities. And I think that if he can regain what he did early in, I mean, he was 20 years old, 21 years old, scoring 60 points in the NHL. That talent doesn't just go away. And if you put him on a line with Michael Bunting and Evgeni Malkin and move Malkin to the wing, I think you're looking at a very, very good scenario for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and potentially a key piece of that kind of middle era, because we're talking about them moving into the next stage beyond Crosby, beyond Malkin. I think he is, and it's a weird situation because it's kind of similar to a player in Anaheim and a Troy Terry, where they're getting ready to shift into a new era, but they have this player that's pretty good. He's just a couple of years ahead of everybody else that's supposed to be coming in that wave. He could be that for the Penguins at 23 years old, with that next wave of Pickering, of Brunick, of hopefully a bunch of different players that have yet to reach their caliber. I mean, Tristan Brose, Emil Pienaniemi had a pretty solid World Juniors. So there is a core here that is building. Now it has to all continue to build, and we know development is not linear for any position in the NHL, and especially for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We have not seen linear development for anybody in a long time, but I think that Zegras could be the figurehead for that. And I think that if he's up for sale, I don't think it's going to be as expensive as everybody expects. And I think the Penguins should 100% be in on it. I mean, look at, as a similar scenario, look at what happened with Cole Caulfield. All this promise starts off slow. They bring in Marty St. Louis, and all of a sudden he's off to the moon. Sometimes it's situations, sometimes it's coaching. And since Cronin and Verbeek have gotten in there, Zegras is kind of fallen off. He's obviously dealt with injuries as well, but maybe that new situation under a Dubas administration, under Mike Sullivan, in the same locker room, where he doesn't have to be the forward face because he's behind Crosby, because he's behind Malkin, Letang, and Karlsson. Maybe that unlocks that potential that we saw a couple years ago. And if that's the case, shoot, the Penguins could hit a home run with that. Now, of course, the return would have to be something that you don't look back on every day and say, man, they gave up a lot for it. But I think that it's worth the risk at this stage.
It is. It totally is. Maybe that's the kind of option that, you know, they swing for. He turns into that, a year late, that Jake Gensel filler.
Yeah, they never did fill that spot. Now, again, he's topped out at 23 goals, so don't expect that immediately. But I think talent-wise and potential for the future-wise, he's, again, 20. I keep saying this because it's crazy. 23 years old. That's it for Trevor Zegras. So a situation to monitor for me, especially. And if you're a Penguins fan, I think you should too. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg. Make sure you like, subscribe, tell all your friends, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.